Hi, I'm Glyn Blackett, and thanks for signing up for this sequence of short videos that are going to show you why good breathing is essential for effective relaxation and stress management, and also how to access the state of optimal breathing. Besides helping you cope with stress, good breathing can improve your all-round brain performance, so you can quickly let go of difficult emotions like anxiety, anger, irritability, low moods and fatigue, and learn to access positive and resourceful states such as calm, clear focus, energy, motivation and willpower, and emotional positivity. Here's a review of what's coming up. First, we'll look at why breathing matters, why it's so important to optimal brain performance. The short answer is that stress affects our breathing pattern, shifting us into a physiological state that impairs brain function. Later in the video, I'll explain some of the science behind this mind-body connection in a little more depth. Any effective stress management strategy needs to take account of the mind-body connection. We need to learn how to set up the biological conditions that are favourable to accessing resourceful states of mind. 2. The number one mistake made when using deep breathing as a relaxation technique, and why it can lead to you feeling worse, not better. Most practitioners teaching breathing techniques aren't aware of this, or at least they fail to mention it, and yet it's so common. That's based on my experience of actually measuring my clients' breathing using a device that can detect this breathing mistake. 3. The difference between good stress and harmful stress, and how to transform harmful stress into good stress. This is important because it's not really possible to avoid stress altogether, and in fact trying to avoid it is part of what makes stress harmful. Instead, the goal is to develop resilience, or the ability to quickly and easily recover from stress, and to make use of the positive energy of stress. 4. We'll review 3 key components of healthy breathing practice. I'll describe these in the second video. 5. Why mindset matters in breathing. If you approach breathing practice in the wrong way, you can very easily get into a sort of mental quicksand where you make things worse, not better, and where the breath can feel uncomfortable and a source of more stress rather than relaxation. In the third video, I'll teach you how to avoid this trap and what the right mindset is. 6. In the fourth video, I'll teach you about heart coherence and how to access it using slow-paced breathing, with the aid of a free breath pacing software tool that you can download from my website. All that's coming up in later videos. In the remainder of this video, I want to show you why and how breathing matters in stress regulation and in optimal brain performance. And my answer centers on the mind-body connection. This is the idea that how we think and feel and act is reflected in the functioning of our bodies, including our brains. Or in other words, our psychology is reflected in our physiology. And it's very much a two-way connection. Let's take a look at a practical example. Suppose you have to give a presentation at work, and it's something that you're not at all confident about, maybe because all the big bosses are going to be there. As you stand up to speak, you're thinking things like, I'm going to make a mess of this, and everybody's going to think that I'm incompetent, I'm not up to the job, and the bosses are going to think that I'm useless, that kind of thing. And with these thoughts comes physical responses. Your throat and your chest feel tight, your hands clammy, you start sweating, you feel hot and flushed, your heart is pounding, you maybe feel shaky or even lightheaded and faint. These physical changes add up to a feeling of anxiety. Of course, if you believe that everyone thinks that you're stupid right when you have to give a presentation, then you would feel anxious. But equally, you believe that kind of thing in the heat of the moment because you're in the physiology of anxiety, or at least of stress and arousal. Now, maybe 3 hours later, when you've calmed down again, you know that those thoughts aren't true. So what we've got is thinking conditions feeling, and feeling conditions thinking. And what we need to do to manage stress effectively is to break this negative loop. My contention is that you have to have this train of bodily reactions for a stressful thought to actually feel bad. If the body didn't react, then it would be just another thought. Or if you can allow the physical changes to quickly dissipate again, rather than kicking off a chain reaction, then you can quickly recover your mental equilibrium again. That's resilience. And to repeat what I said earlier, resilience is the real goal as opposed to the false goal of avoiding stress. When you build resilience, you can start to see stress as not so much a threat or a danger to be avoided and escaped from, and more as a challenge. And the stress response as your body's mobilizing energy to meet that challenge. And it feels more akin to excitement rather than anxiety. In fact, there's evidence that the stress response does actually enable better performance. For example, one study showed that of people sitting an exam, those who had the largest rise in the stress hormone cortisol did the best in the exam. So this is when stress is good stress, when it's a challenge rather than a threat. Stress only becomes harmful when we fight against it in an effort to avoid it or escape it, causing it to spiral out of control. And also when we get trapped in the stress response, even if it's minor stress, if we can't relax afterwards, and if the stress becomes unremitting, then it becomes harmful to health and well-being. Now, a significant part of this physical response to stress has to do with breathing. Let's take a closer look at how stress relates to breathing. Suppose you hear a loud crash or something startling, like the sort of thing you get in a horror film. You'd probably gasp. So it's sharp intake of air, followed by holding of the breath. Now suppose just a vaguely stressful thought comes into your head, like it's your performance review next week. Now, you might not actually notice it, but you're likely to get a weaker form of the same thing, the same change in your breathing. So you take a bigger breath, filling the lungs up and tightening the breathing muscles so that when you breathe out again, you don't fully let go. So a weaker version of the same startle response. And what happens when stress is prolonged? Well, you can get trapped in a pattern of fast, shallow breathing from the chest, as opposed to from the belly, which is relaxed breathing. In other words, this style of breathing becomes a habit, maybe an unconscious habit, and chances are you're actually over-breathing. Now, all of this can make a profound difference to your brain function, and to explain how, I need to say a little more about breathing physiology. Let's start by saying more about over-breathing. You've probably heard of hyperventilation in reference to panic attacks. But before you get to thinking that this isn't relevant to you, let me say that a panic attack represents an extreme point on the spectrum of dysfunctional breathing, and that mild cases are much more common and yet largely unrecognized. My experience of measuring breathing in my stress clients suggests that a large majority of anxiety and stress cases involve some overbreathing. To put it simply, overbreathing is a problem because it significantly reduces the oxygen delivered to your brain cells. You're getting plenty of oxygen into the lungs and even into the blood, but not to brain cells, and then your brain doesn't work properly. In a classic panic attack, this reduction can be as much as 60%, 60%. In mild cases, it might be 10 or 20%, and chances are you wouldn't notice it in terms of your breathing. Overbreathing is the number one breathing mistake. That is to say, the most common form of breathing dysregulation and the most important to put right. If your breathing feels uncomfortable, or if deep, slow breathing makes you feel worse, not better, then overbreathing is most likely the reason for this. But there's a second aspect of breathing physiology, or breathing regulation, that also has a profound bearing on stress and emotions like anxiety and anger and irritability, and it's to do with something called the parasympathetic nervous system. This is a branch of the autonomic nervous system that's critical to relaxation. It's the counterpart of the sympathetic nervous system, which revs up your arousal level in preparation for fight or flight, as it's called. So the sympathetic is your accelerator, while the parasympathetic is like the brake. Besides relaxing the body, the parasympathetic activates parts of the brain responsible for social functioning and also executive functioning. In other words, the parasympathetic can take you into a state of relaxed, focused alertness, and it makes it easier to connect with other people. Now, deep, slow breathing is one of the most common relaxation techniques around. How does it work? Well, it happens that during the exhalation, you're naturally activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So with a long, slow out-breath, You're giving the parasympathetic a chance to do its thing, and it doesn't get that with rapid, shallow breathing or stressed breathing. The problem is that most people, when they do this slow, deep breathing, will actually induce a degree of over-breathing. And I know that because I've measured it happening in my clients. It happens especially when the breathing is done over-deliberately, when it comes from the thinking, problem-solving mind, rather than from what we might call the body intelligence. And I'll say more about this in a later video. Now, it might still work as a relaxation technique, but remember, you're going to be getting less oxygen to the brain, which is why it can feel fuzzy and spaced out. It's definitely not optimal breathing. And we have to take care that it doesn't happen because in the long term, it's not helpful. Okay, let's conclude by summarizing what I've said in this short presentation. Since stress and difficult emotions like anger and fear are mind-body phenomena, affecting not just your thinking but your biology, a reasonable strategy for managing stress and building resilience is to learn to let go of the physiology underpinning anxiety and move towards physiology that supports calm, clear focus and positivity. Breathing needs to be central to this strategy because the stressed pattern of breathing typically involves some degree of overbreathing which reduces oxygen delivery to brain cells. And conversely, good breathing optimizes oxygen delivery to the brain and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, relaxing the body and engaging the brain's social and executive centers. So that's why breathing matters, and in the next video we'll get onto what good breathing actually looks like. For now, I'd like to finish with a little homework task. Think about how your own breathing changes under stress. Bring to mind a time when you felt really good, calm and relaxed. Perhaps one time when you're on holiday or something like that. How did your breath feel? Now, this might not be easy because you may not have been aware of how your breathing was, so don't worry if you don't get very far with this. But also think about the kind of problems or stressful situations that led you to signing up for this course. Can you get a sense of what your breathing is like then? You might even feel a little bit stressed just by thinking about it. But just be accepting of that, and in the next video, we'll begin the process of changing it.